All right, everyone, welcome back to Breaking the Golf Industry. I am your host, Cameron Cox, and today I'm super excited about the guest that we have with us today. Today we are here with Connor Averell, head golf professional at Bigwin Island Golf Club, and today we are talking about breaking in as a head golf professional. The whole idea here is speaking about the transition from aspiring assistant to taking your steps into the first head professional role and kind of what you've learned from the past 3 years here, Connor. First and foremost, welcome, Connor, and we are so excited to have you. I want to just give a little bit of a background to yourself. So, very impressive resume here. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but started out at Mad River Golf Club, went to Mississauga, big country club in the city, and then went on to Bandon Dunes, the amazing resort. You went on to TPC Toronto, Oslerbrook, did some food and beverage management as well, and now you have landed at Bigwin Island as the head golf professional. So welcome, Connor, and I'll give you a chance to kind of correct me there if I was wrong on anything, and I would love to just hear a little bit about your career from you.
No, yeah, you nailed it right there. Thanks so much for having me. But yeah, quite a few different properties in a short amount of time there. So good on you for getting that pretty much perfect.
Okay, good. Well, I've had the opportunity to know you for over 10 years now. Obviously, we went to Georgian College together, and I saw this career ambitious professional in you and the steps that you took. Obviously, you went out and you started your own podcast as well. In that time, you were also the PGA of Ontario Assistant of the Year. So you've done some amazing things. So why don't we start with just the beginning of your career, kind of when you got into it, and talk a little bit about what separated you when you were coming up and what was really important to you once you got to Georgian and started your.
Yeah. So things kind of started for me. I got into golf late as a whole. I didn't get into it till I was in high school. And then kind of from there, didn't really know what I wanted to do at all. Went to originally from Barrie, Ontario. So doing the golf management program at Georgian was kind of a no-brainer. I liked golf. I didn't really know what a career in golf entailed. But I figured worst case scenario, I'll go to school at Georgian for 4 years, stay at home, and come out with a business degree that I'll probably take elsewhere. At first, was really interested in teaching and coaching, high performance players, college players, stuff like that. But with I guess the easiest way to explain it's with our kind of co-op structure at the time at the school, you kind of had to dip your toe into a little bit of everything. So turf for a year, worked pro shop for a year, worked as a year as an assistant pro, and all those things kind of helped me kind of steer me to where I wanted to go. I realized pretty quickly that I enjoyed teaching, but I didn't love it. Got to work for some really great head professionals and see what that job entailed. And, at the time I thought, oh, I don't want to be a head golf pro because I'll never get to golf. And, all those things you think about when you're 17, 18, 19 years old that, really aren't that important. But I kind of saw it as, I get to do a little bit of everything. And kind of that was kind of didn't really figure it out till post school that I wanted to go that route. But basically by trying everything, that helped me kind of steer me. And it went from being what the last job I would have taken when I was going into school to now being my dream job.
That's fantastic. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit when you're talking about these co-op placements. And I want to take this from the lens of somebody that's coming into the industry and looking to really make their mark and be ambitious. I think that not only the roles that you chose helped you kind of figure all this out, but the ambition and the facilities and the pros that you worked for was another big part to that. So walk us through a little bit on your decision-making process, because it's very easy for people to get comfortable with where they are and just decide that, I found somewhere close to home, I'm going to start working here, see if I like this industry. And you took that to a whole new level, and wanted to just kind of get your understanding of it. And I'm sure it was very difficult to make Bandon happen and a couple of your other roles. So give us a little insight and give some context to some of these professionals that are coming up and looking for these opportunities and might not know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the easiest way to explain it is every time going into one of these co-ops and even, jobs post post Georgian College, was always kind of thinking of, what's next and what doors can this open for me. So, it kind of really started at Mad River. I grew up at Barrie Country Club and had a great head professional there, Bill Wogden, and he kind of opened that door for me. To go and work for Brian French, who, was the head professional at Mad River for over 25 years, a true pro's pro, and, played golf to a high level. Members loved him, had a pretty good rapport with people, and kind of somebody that, he does things a little bit differently, but was very, very old school in how he did things, which at the time, there's not many of those guys, remaining. So great to kind of, dip your toe in there, and, figured I wasn't going to be there long term, but, what doors would that open for me? And the opportunity there was to, jump right into the pro shop. We had one, associate professional at the time. So not to make it any sort of depth chart, but, I was the second or third, person in that shop, to, get things that trickled down. So, my first year in there, I was, basically got the experience of an assistant golf pro, got to help with events, got to do leagues, got to, manage a back shop, got to, the regular pro shop duties of, taking green fees and selling polos. But with a membership like Mad River, I knew it was going to open a bunch of doors. And funny enough, when a job at Mississauga came up, our men's captain at the time, his daughter was working at Mississauga in more of a membership role at the time, but she was a professional prior. So he wrote a letter on my behalf to the head professional, and, it opened a door there. At the time when I was going into it, I think was that my, ultimate goal, but, it's funny how things kind of work out. So, now all of a sudden I'm in my second year and I'm at, Mississauga, which is, one of the most historic clubs in Canada. It's crazy busy, tons of history, very different than Mad River. You go from, laid back, relaxed, kind of, we'll call it secondary, private club for a lot of the members, to now a primary private club right, right down and just outside of Toronto. So very different atmosphere, and same thing, thought like, I went to, now I was the youngest and, least tenured of probably 6 or 7 professionals. So, still getting to do new things and learn new roles, and, now working with a team of golf pros rather than just, 1 or 2 people. So same thing there, thought I'd be there for a while, but Bandon Dunes was, well, I guess working in the States was always a goal of mine and somewhere I thought I'd land. So weirdly enough, the summer prior, after Mad River, I was supposed to go to Bandon Dunes. That story's a little, less sexy. It was basically me sending emails to directors of golf at, top clubs in the US and just saying, hey, I want to come work for you. And they replied, and we did a phone interview, and, they offered me a position as an intern. It ended up falling through because of my visa that year after Mad River. So that happened pretty early on. So I was still able to, in a good position to find a job the next year, and then I ended up finding Mississauga. That fall came around, and again, had no intentions of leaving, but the director of golf there called me and said, hey, we're looking for interns for the next year. Would you be interested? And had a bit of an internal conflict because I was at a great spot. But, the opportunity to go out there is kind of once in a lifetime. And the biggest thing for me was, this is something I can put on my resume. It's different. Nobody else is going to be able to say they worked there. Going out and being able to play there was obviously a huge draw as well. But even talking to my director of golf at the time, he was like, you have to go. It's a no-brainer. Like, if you want to come back, like, there's always these jobs, kind of thing. Like, we almost were like, it's better to go there for a year and come back to Mississauga at the end.
Absolutely.
Didn't end up happening that way, but that was kind of the plan. And the other thing was, I was going from an assistant pro role, which at the time, being, 20 years old, was pretty great. It was probably only you and myself in our class that had those types of jobs. And, we had both played into the PGA Canada prior to that and all of that stuff. But now taking an intern role, I think some people thought it was a bit of a step down. And it probably was in terms of responsibilities, but going out there, Again, it was one of those ones that there's a deadline on it because you're on a visa and you're coming back. So,
Right.
you're not going out there for 10, 15 years or even 2 years. You're going out there for 8 months. So, but going out there, you get to meet the who's who of the golf industry. You get to, see a golf shop that does $10 million in soft goods retail. Get to see how a high-end resort operates. You get to meet all kinds of cool people, and I have friends that I've made out there that I still talk to on a daily basis. So
And you know what, Connor, that's great. I think that you put it great there where you might have stepped back on the responsibility side, but the level of standard and the door that it was open to you on something that that really you couldn't get here in Canada is far worth more than just more responsibility at somewhere that maybe you could have been comfortable at. So I actually got a question for you on that, because I think as we steer to getting your first head professional role, you mentioned something about going to Bandon and it making you different. And I think when I look at you and your career, all it was different. And I think of the things that really make you stand out. And it's the things that you did that made you different, whether it was your podcast and getting people to know there, or setting up the pro-am that you did at Oslerbrook. A lot of your career is set on not just doing the role or the responsibility, but getting out there and being able to kind of separate yourself from others. Talk a little bit, if you don't mind, or give some advice to people on when you went through that head professional hiring process. What were you leaning on? Were some of these things that made you different, some of the things that you were really focusing on, or how should a pro be thinking about the things that they are doing as they're starting to prepare for these interviews?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me going into that process was, going through at the time I was 26. And I knew that there was going to be, my goal was always to get that job before I was 30. And I knew, in our industry, that's young. And so I always knew that I was going to have to do something that was, kind of, when you get in front of that committee, you have to prove yourself. You're not going to be able to lean on experience because you just haven't been in the industry enough. You can lean on your network, you can lean on experiences, and you can lean on, differentiating yourself. So when you're going up against the assistants as well from, those top Toronto private clubs that, work for, fantastic professionals and all that stuff, I would say the deck's stacked against you. But yeah, like you said, differentiating yourself. And again, you're just trying to convince people to take a chance on you. But yeah, like you mentioned it was, how do you stand out? And it's, my resume is far from, the norm, bounced around to, a bunch of clubs, but gained good experiences. And I always say I went into them thinking they were going to be a bit more of a permanent spot, but something always came up that was really good that I couldn't turn down. And when you kind of explain it to a committee, they're like, yeah, no brainer. Like if you're at Mississauga, you definitely go to Bandon Dunes, and when you come home, you definitely do that. So I think if anybody else was in my shoes, they would have made the same decisions had the opportunities presented themselves. But it is one of those things that some people do look at in a bit of a different light, like why didn't they stay at that place forever? And it's like, well, I could have stuck at Mad River for 5 years, or I could have gotten, all these different experiences. At the end of the day, which one, are you going to hire? And there's pros and cons to both, but I'd be pretty confident in saying that, you separate yourself a little more by doing that. There is
I
still
love
something to be said about sticking at a place and putting down roots. And I did that towards the end of my, tenure as an assistant at Oslerbrook. But yeah, I mean, it's always just when you get in that interview process, everybody can run an event. Everybody can run a men's day. Everybody can, do a buying plan. And if you can't do those, you're probably not in the interview process. So when you have to, when it push comes to shove, what makes you different and what can you do? And, it's okay. I had a podcast that opened up a network for me. So, when people call around for these jobs, you might not have worked for these people, but your name's getting mentioned. The pro-am that we ran at Oslerbrook, I can say that was to be a member pleaser, but again, it was one of those ones where I had in the back of my pocket knowing like, hey, I'm going to be very selective on who I'm inviting because, when these jobs come up, I know these are the guys and I'm going to run an event, show them how I can do it, show them how I can, talk in front of a big, crowd and do that. And again, those are just all these different things that, little moments that lead up to all these different things. And, the person I ended up working for, was invited to that pro-am. And so all these, didn't know that at the time,
Right.
but it is all those little things that kind of, just to make yourself, there's different ways to put your resume at the top of the pile. And it can be working at great clubs and working for great pros and getting a great reference. That gets a lot of people a long way. But there's also, kind of, going against the norm and having all these different experiences. And there's something to be said for that as well.
So you brought up a couple of really good things there. I think that you're totally right in the sense that being good at your job is going to get you the interview, which is one thing, but it really can come down in a lot of times these things that make you different, which gets you over the line and allows you to be seen in a different light than maybe the person that you're up against for that role. So I really like how you said that. And I think that's great advice for anyone that's going through that process. And I would love just to get a quick little piece of advice from you is like looking back on your time as an assistant, I think it's easy to get caught up in where am I working? What level am I at? All these things. Knowing what you went through in your interview process and kind of what set you apart, where do you think that an assistant or an associate that's looking to make those next steps, where should their mindset be in when they're working on their career and developing it?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a balance. Like you want to work at great clubs for great people. That's always a great start. But I think there's also a lot to be said at what you're doing. And when I was at Oslerbrooks, and I don't mean this anyway in a negative, but it's a really great private club, but it's not Toronto Golf or Rosedale or, anything like that. It's a little bit more it's a little bit more laid back, pricing is very different, all of that stuff. Fantastic membership, very active. So, you get to get involved in that stuff. But, I'm not blind to the fact that if you stack up somebody from Oslerbrook versus Rosedale, who's gonna stand out a little more. However, with that, I got to do a ton of stuff at Oslerbrook. I mean, pretty much do everything. I had a great, head professional in Conrad Riley, and he gave me the keys to the castle and let me, kind of run with things and experiment and try things, fail, learn, fail again, and kind of, do those things. So if I was to say to somebody, hey, well, you're thinking of where you're working or you're thinking of moving, but look at what you're doing. Being the fourth or fifth guy at a top private club is great for a little bit, but being the first person or even second person at a second tier club can bring you a whole lot more opportunities. It all depends too on the type of club you want to land at after. But I think there's a ton to be said on, what you're actually doing every day versus just showing up to work, putting on a polo that's got a really great club's crest on it versus showing up every day and having, an impact and doing that. And, your members being able to, recognize that and remember you and all of those things. So it's a bit of both. And if I was to say, hey, you have 5 years to be an assistant, do 2 or 3 at a really high end private club just to say, you were there and learn that experience of how those places operate, but also find a place that's going to give you some opportunities and let you do those things. And I think that's kind of the perfect balance in my opinion.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. Thinking of that 5 years, you're an assistant, you're trying to become a head professional in the next 5 years. What are some of the areas right now where you think that with the industry changing quite a bit, like where are the spots that you think that people can differentiate themselves or some opportunities that you think should be taken advantage of right now?
Yeah. I think, the more and more people can learn about, all facets of the industry, like really be well-rounded. So if you had 5 years, I would say, spend a year doing retail, spend a year doing events, spend a year doing, golf operations management, spend a year learning, the budgeting side and just be as well-rounded as possible and have those experiences. Too many times I think people stick around, they do the events for 5 years, but they've got no idea how to do, a buying plan or, vice versa. And I think when you get into the role as a head pro, it's not your job to be the best at anything because you're generally guiding people and getting assistance on these things, and you hire your weaknesses, but being as well-rounded as possible. If I was to hire somebody tomorrow that said that, hey, I want to, be a head pro next year, it'd be like, okay, well, what haven't you done? And that's what we're going to do this year, and gear it towards that way. So I think the more you can do and the more you can, relate back on, the better than being one or even two-dimensional.
A really important message there to make sure that you're understanding your strengths, but also I loved how you put that you have to hire your weaknesses as well and understand where your shortfalls are, be able to lean on some people. We'll talk about your leadership here in a little bit, but I think that you've been a great leader, and we've sent some of our staff up to come work for you, and they've had an amazing experience there as well. Let's take a little transition now. So take us through, so surprisingly, ironic enough, I think that we became head pros like right at the same time. We were going through everything at the exact same moment. Talk me through, you get the offer, you accept it, and now Connor Averell is a head golf professional. What was that like, and what sort of advice would you give to an associate that has now taken on a head professional role and is now about to walk into their first season as a head golf professional?
Yeah, I mean, at Bigwin, it's a little different because we work remote in the winters, so it's probably the weirdest spot to come into the role because one day you're sitting on your couch and the next day you're working remote. So not that glamorous of a start, but it's very different, and I don't think anything really prepares you for it. And if I was to tell myself something, I would have told myself that hey, you're going to be learning everything from scratch. Like the most important thing is get to know your team because you're going to lean on them heavily when, they're teaching you the ropes of everything. And, the biggest thing I think is, get to know the other, department managers, get to know, your rules and policies, get all that stuff kind of, down pat. And then honestly, it's not really, something you'd think about, but I spent a week because our general manager at the time kind of suggested it. So I have to give him the credit for that. But I went down to Toronto for a week and just set up meetings with members just to get to know people, put names to faces and all that stuff. And, the more and more in this role that you can have that FaceTime, the better, which is something I didn't really, appreciate or understand at the start. But, again, it's one of those things you're gonna have to lean on a lot of people, time management, kind of you're drinking from a fire hose for that first year. So hang on. But again, at the end of the day, it's nothing you haven't done before. So it's a different course, maybe they run their member guest a little differently, or maybe they set up, the staging area a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, like, what you're doing, you've done it all. You're the person who's executed it all before. Now you're just the person leading it. So the stuff that you don't get prepared for is, the time constraints, staff things, whether it's hiring or onboarding or, just dealing with things that come up throughout the season, member things that kind of pop up here and there. But the job itself is not anything you haven't done before. It's, now you're just kind of, standing there with the control stick rather than being the person on the ground.
And owning it, right? Like, I think that's another part of it's your responsibility now, and it's a whole different level of that. And I always thought that, when I was coming up and as an associate, I always tried to take that ownership because I knew that down the road it would actually become my ownership, and that I need to be prepared for that. And you don't want that to be your first instance of that. Now, you've had 2 very successful seasons at Bigwin so far, going into your third. Was there anything you learned after year 1, which you thought, maybe I should have probably done this a little bit better, or, oh my gosh, it would have been so helpful if I started off this way? There's so many pros, again, that are going into this right now and are needing this advice. So what did you learn from year 1?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to that time management thing. Like, you go from being, I always say, like, you don't want to lose your roots as you don't want to forget that, you were an assistant just the year prior, but there are things that you have to kind of remove yourself from. Like, I would often catch myself, dotting a scorecard for a match, or, getting into the weeds on those things where, trusting the people that you have around you to do those things. And it's not that you don't trust them. It's just, force of habit that you find yourself, doing all the little, nitty gritty things that you really don't need to be doing, and your time can be spent better elsewhere. time management, I think, will always be something you struggle with. Whether it's emails or, just getting pulled in a million directions and finding out what's best. And then for me personally, like it's delegating. It's figuring out, putting a structure in place, which, I've worked on the last 2 years. And I would say this year, I'm probably the most confident in it of, giving our assistants and associates and golf shop attendants real responsibilities and stuff they can own, so that when they go to onto other jobs, they have things that they've learned and that they've owned. It could be as small as, so and so's in charge of, the first tee building and keeping it tidy and making sure we have tees, pencils, scorecards, all that stuff, to managing all the events throughout the course of the season. So, we write out at the start of the year who's doing what, and so our staff also know who they can go to for those questions. It doesn't always have to come back to me. And giving them some, like you said it, and it's the best thing, is just ownership. Like, so and so's owning it, and if they're not owning it, you have something to kind of hold them to. The more and more we can do that, the better, and it makes your job easier. And now you're just you're checking in on these things. You're not the person cleaning up the first tee building. You've got somebody for it, and if they're not doing it, you know who you're asking to do it, and stuff like that.
So you're totally right. Delegation is very important when you're heading in as a head professional, but I think you need to elaborate that on a little bit more, because it's not just delegation, it's the leadership that comes with that. And I think that that's something that I've seen over the time with your assistants, is you're not just telling somebody else what to do, but walk us through how your leadership changed over year one to year two, and how you were able to help develop your staff to be at the level that you could delegate to them.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, because you go from doing it, right? So you're the one, how to do everything, how to, or at least you think you do, and now you're giving it to someone else. And as much as you want them to succeed, you just have to kind of, know where to step in. I think that's the biggest thing for me, is, kind of saying, giving it to them in a timely manner and say, hey, come back to me and let me know how you did. Let me know where your pain points are, but here's the expectations. And honest communication with them is always helpful. Like, if they didn't help them where they met, they missed a few things. I think the biggest thing is always explaining why things are important. Why is it important to make sure the handicaps are correct? Why is it, this? I read a really great book, about, leadership and culture and all that stuff. And, I've always found it helps, like I said, we've all done it and we've all made mistakes. And so it's okay to make those mistakes, and I expect, do I love it when mistakes are made? Obviously not. But, I understand they're going to happen, and I've made them myself. So making sure that they're aware of that, and making sure it's a safe spot where, I would much rather them come to me, the morning of the member guest because they've made a mistake and, we need to correct it now, than the member guests go out and then be afraid not to tell me because, they think I'm going to get mad or something like that. So making it a safe environment for them to make those mistakes and learn and fail is really important to me. I had that, as an assistant, so I want to make sure others have it. And letting them kind of, figure it out on their own, but also, be there to, lend a hand when needed. So, I think the biggest thing is lay out the expectations at the start, allow them to, I think the biggest thing too is make it your own. Like, I don't want you to do it the way I do it. If I wanted it to be done the way I wanted it to be done, I would do it. So I want you to do it. I want you to make it your own, learn, stumble, get back up and get back at it. So leadership style is obviously, I try and be as hands-on as possible, but also allowing them to make it unique, make it their own, put their own impression on it, and have ownership of it.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the internship program that you've implemented and continue to make successful, and really explain, why is it great for somebody to come work at Bigwin?
Yeah. So we created an internship after my first years. It's called the Bigwin Island Internship Program. Essentially, we target PGM students across, basically across the province. There's not a ton of PGM programs out there anymore. Humber and Georgian primarily, and then we get a few other sport management students and a couple from Fanshawe. Essentially what it is it kind of stemmed from me being a part of an intern program at Bandon Dunes, and we had 12 of us out there, I think. from all across North America. There was myself from Canada. We had two from Scotland, and we basically got to work in the golf shops or different areas of the resort. And then every kind of other week, we had an intern meeting where they would bring in a guest speaker or somebody from the resort, or our director of golf would cover a topic. And it could be Peter Millar coming in to talk about what's it like, being a sales rep. It could be our general manager talking about how to build your resume, all different kind of things that were very valuable. So it was like we're going to work, but also going to school. And this is something that is very common in the US. A lot of these, high-end clubs have internship programs. Oak Hill in Rochester has a fantastic one. Olympic Club out west has a really great one. And there's many other ones where they target these students. And I kind of figured, well, it's clearly working for them. So, why would it not work for us? And so basically we build a job description. We pay them, above kind of standard. They basically kind of make what an entry-level assistant would make. We put them up in housing, and, they get to be kind of a key part of our operation. So they're working they're working the first tee, they're working the range, they're helping with events setup, and they're kind of, we're elevating that role. And, we give them lots of opportunities and things to learn. They get to caddy, they get to do all those different things. Why we did it, there's a reason for Bigwin to do it, is because down the line, we're going to need to hire assistant golf pros. And what better way than to kind of create a feeder system where, they can come and work for you for 2 or 3 years as an intern. And then if they, choose to go the golf pro route, it's right there in your lap to, promote somebody within. There's also a part of it of giving back to the industry and providing that learning experience that, I would say I wish I had when I was in school, where there's a program geared to us, and we do the same thing. So we do some meetings throughout the summer where we talk about many different things. It could be walking them through, how do you buy for a retail shop? What are the different jobs in the industry? All that stuff. This year we're going to take it a little bit step further. I know you're going to come up and help us out, and I'll have some sales reps and, different people in the industry that come up and talk to them. And it's a great experience. They get to come up, they get to spend the summer in Muskoka. They get to play a bunch of golf. And then, the most important thing that, I wouldn't say they realize now, but they're creating relationships, and they're building their network. And the first year we had 5 guys. They were all from Humber. This year we have 9. We have some from Humber. We have some from Georgian. We have some from Fanshawe. We have one girl coming from Campbell University in the US. We have one from McGill and one from Brock, I believe. And so they've all got different goals in the industry, but my hope is they look back, and if one kid goes and works for Golf Canada and another kid goes and works for another club, and they need some help to help out a member or to get a member out at a golf course or whatever it may be, they're creating those connections like I've made with the guys that I worked with out in Bandon. So, there's a give back, but there's also we want to also get great people. We want to get golf-minded people, and this is kind of our way to target them. So, now our golf operations team is, we still have, kind of the, typical summer student that you would hire that, and they're fantastic. But we also get, 9 people who are, call it aspirational in the industry. And, I'd like to say you're going to get a little bit of a different experience with them, and they're golf minded. They can talk to a member on the practice tee about their golf game, or maybe, provide some, information, or, when they're talking about a shot they hit on 15, they can, truly relate to how hard or easy it was. All those little kind of things that help make the member experience a little bit better.
That's so cool. Really, it's true mentorship at the end of it. And I think to see your program grow from where it was to now being extended, like that's amazing. And you've got such a great reach there. And I'm sure the talent pool that you've created now because of that is amazing. I know mentors have played a very big role in your career. When you came to become a head professional, like what were you leaning on your mentors for? Tell us about maybe some of the value you got there, or where you wish you got more from.
Yeah, I was lucky. One of my biggest mentors was our general manager, Luke Ridley, and he recently left to go to Albany in the Bahamas. But when I came into the role, he was in the role prior. So he got promoted to general manager. So again, not necessarily the norm experience you're going to roll into. So I leaned on him quite a bit, and he was fantastic and, very patient and answered the silly questions of, where does this go, or how do you do this? So that was a huge one for me. And then outside the industry or outside Bigwin, you kind of start to lean on, different people that you might not have. It could be a sales rep that you have a great, relationship with, who's going to, bail you out and help you get a gift in time for a member event. It could be your past professional that you worked for and Conrad Riley, and he was fantastic and, answered, all the questions. And these questions can be as serious as, how would you deal with this, or how did you do this, to, hey, I remember we had this, where did you order it from, or who's the contact for this? And then, it's just people in the industry. Like, I was very fortunate to get to know, um, Doug Rankin, who was, a longtime professional at Toronto Golf. He joined Oslerbrook the year I was leaving and the year he was retiring. So I got to know him well. And he's somebody that, if I have a question or, a tough conversation or, something that I'm, really wrestling with, I can call him, and he's, he's probably done it 20 or 30 times. So there's people like that as well. And, our industry's great. People are always looking to help. And you never know who you're going to lean on, or who's going to, you're going to need to ask for help. So keep that in mind as well.
Totally.
And as you reiterated last time and on your last episode, and you'll probably reiterate, 1,000 more times, is how important the relationships are in this industry.
Yeah. No, you're totally right on that. And I never thought about how much it's those relationships that you might not have thought of people as mentors or anyone else. But the golf industry is such a support system, whether it's whether, like you're saying, it's a rep or somebody you worked for or a member of a golf course. Those relationships are so key, and being able to really hang on to that and ask for support or ask for advice, throw some ideas around it. Yeah, you can't do that enough, especially in your first year. So let's transition a little bit to, you're heading into year 3 now. So you've kind of got over that first year growth. Second year, you put some programs in place. The internship program is amazing, and super excited to see what you've done with that. But like, where now? Like, what's your mindset going into the third year now as head professional at Bigwin?
Yeah, I mean, it is funny. Like, every year is different. This is probably the 1 year where, we're not changing much. Our events are, staying the same. We don't have any new policies. We don't have anything new to, really learn. But I think the biggest thing is I've got a group of, call it 2 professionals and 2, PGM students that are coming back for a second year. I've got, Jacob Norton, our teaching pro, in his second year. I think it's like his 7th year at the club, but his second year as the teaching pro. So excited for those, those guys. And to see where, what they do, and being as helpful as I can to them. The better that they get at their job, the easier my job gets. So, they're excited to come back. The first week of the year, they're not learning everybody's names and, where the bathroom is and, how to get to the first tee. They're greeting members, asking them how their winter was, and, doing all those things. So, starting off this year with a running versus, walking will be really great with kind of our key staff. And then just, big things like, it's different things like the golf shop, changing up, and, our buying structure and events and all those things. And, you kind of make tweaks and changes every year, and you want to see how they turn out. So, we had a really, really great year in the golf shop last year, and, now it's kind of can we do even better? And it's one of those things that, you kind of put the pieces in place, and now you wait and see. So, we don't have we have our 25th anniversary this season. So there's always things going on. But yeah, it is one of those ones where, I'm excited for our group to come back and have their second year. It's, now it's gone from a team I inherited to a team I've hired. Which is really great. And, they're all excited to get going, which, makes me excited. So that's probably what excites me the most is having them all back and getting ready to go and looking to see how they, embrace their, challenges and responsibilities this season. And yeah, I think it'll be be a good year.
Okay, you are being way too generous on the hiring front. You work at a facility where people are going to have to move to you. They're going to have to probably live in staff housing unless they're lucky enough to know somebody up there. They're going to have to take a boat to work. And the golf season isn't as long as everyone else's. One of the hardest things and that can get a new head professional so behind is not being able to hire a recruit and being stuck with not having your pick at who you want to be working for you. Talk to us about your advice on how you got people up to work for you and now grown an internship program to 11 people on that. Like, that's amazing. And don't undermine that at all.
I appreciate that. I mean, we have to think outside the box in how we hire. It is, I would say this. If you're in high school or college, it's a no-brainer to come up and work in Muskoka. Most students are, wrapping up their exam period as we speak. And, as of today, we're 4 weeks from opening. So there's a little bit of a natural transition there. And then, September, they head back to school. We've really only got 4 or 5 weeks of our season left. The PGM students have a little bit of a longer, summer. So they get to work a little bit longer, which is fantastic. But once you get outside of college, and now you're looking for a full-time job, that's where we will always struggle. And you're competing against the clubs in the city, or even just not that far south of us in Barrie, where they can offer year-round employment. So it's that same conversation of how do you differentiate yourself and what else can you add in terms of value. I'll always say that we try and and everybody will say this, so it doesn't differ, but you try and pay top of market. You try and, pay, make people feel, as valued as possible in terms of, salary, but that only goes so far. And, how else do you differentiate it? So, our benefits package that we give our professionals is, I would say second to none. They get a massive uniform allowance. They get, if they want to play in tournaments, we will build a package towards that. They get to go and, in the winters, this isn't have a dollars and cents part of it, but if they want to go and, spend the winter in Florida, they can probably go and play some of the best clubs down there. One of our assistants goes and plays in, the pro member at the Floridian every year with one of our members, and he's teeing it up against, Ricky Fowler and Gordon Sargent and, a bunch of Corn Ferry and Champions Tour players. So, how many assistants in Canada can say that? And that, again, as much as you want to say there's, multiple reasons for that, it's because he works at Bigwin and he gets to get to know that member. And so there's these little tiny things that add up, and, it's what can I offer dollars and cents wise or in terms of packages, but, our members make it a great spot to come and work, and people want to come back. So it is one of those things where they know that, hey, I'm not probably going to be there for the long term. I have one employee on year round in the golf operation, and in season I have over 30. So it is a pretty, stark difference, but what can we do? And, maybe it's extending the contract a little bit longer, but it is one of those things that has to make sense for the right person. And for the people we have right now, it does. But it's building a package that's geared towards them that, hey, going and working extra 2 or 3 months where I'm going to be running, simulators or doing stuff like that, is maybe less appealing when, I can have a few months off and I can go to Florida, or I can go and travel, or, some of them, a lot of them teach in the off season at different simulator places. So, we've set up, them to assist with that, and we'll send it out to our members and say, hey, so-and-so's teaching out of here in the winter. They're not an employee of us right now and they're working for somebody else, but, go support them and take lessons from them. So we still try and help them out as much as possible in those areas. And like I said, we've got Jacob Norton, who's our teaching professional that's, been coming back for 7 years. He's fortunate. He has a place in the area, but he stays busy in the winter teaching members down in the city, and he's kind of made it work. So it is one of those things that you just have to get creative and create value in different ways.
Yeah. And I can't recommend that path enough. And as an assistant, it's very easy to get tied up in how long am I working for? How much am I getting paid? But at the end of the day, like, the opportunities, like to be able to go down to the Floridian or get to be developed in a way that's going to set you up for your next roles, those are worth way more than a couple extra dollars an hour or an extended contract sometimes. So not always. There's obviously times where that is important, but you've done a great job at developing people and getting them attracted to coming up and spending the summer with you. And I think that's really important, is that as a new head professional, it's very important that you're investing in these individuals, and they have that your support, that they're going to be looked after, they're going to learn, it's going to be beneficial for them in their career. So whether you got top dollar or not, you're going to be able to help change somebody's life and their career trajectory. And if you work on that, that's really going to help you build the best team that you can. So Connor, we're getting to the top of the hour, and I think that I'll leave you with just two questions here. And I think there's one for the new head professional, but also the aspiring professional that you might look back 10 years ago and think of yourself as. And we'll start there. Like, it's one piece of advice that you would be giving to an up and coming professional in the industry right now.
I think the biggest thing is, and I kind of look at it to our team, is taking initiative is something that's, I think undervalued. I have a ton of value, and I bet all of our other head professional colleagues would say the same thing, but it's more, I don't know if it's something really you can teach and you just have, but I would much prefer, one of our assistants or associates to come to me and say, hey, I did this, what do you think? Rather than, hey, what do you want me to do? And, what I give them to do is probably not going to be, what they just came and did, because it's one of those things that, you want to, take a stab at it and do it. And like, if you don't do it well, it's better to, learn from that and correct course the next time versus, not even get the chance to do it. And it could be as simple as, hey, I want to do this. Can I take a crack at it? And, it's kind of a middle of those two things. And I think that there's something to be said for those who take initiative and what opportunities that will bring you in the future. And that's what I always kind of say to our group is, throughout the course of the season, there's going to be opportunities. There's going to be, things that come up or places to go that, it's going to go to somebody. You guys are all competing against each other at the end of the day for these opportunities, and whoever, shows that's, that they want it more is going to get it. So, I guess two things, like I said, take initiative, and, every day you're interviewing, and you never know what that's going to mean. It could be, somebody walks into the golf shop that's, a head professional at another club, and they're playing with a member at your club, and you go above and beyond and create a great experience. Well, that person's for sure going to remember it. And, if they are looking to hire somebody, they might think of you. And I've had that happen to me where, I've been in another place and somebody's been fantastic. And, when those jobs come up, you kind of reach out, or you hope they apply, or, it's those little things that take initiative. You never know who you're going to meet, and come into every day looking to, kind of with that mindset of, what can I do to, make an improvement, and good things will happen.
That's awesome. And, interviewing every day, I think that's great. Now let's spin it the other way now. So interview went well, you've got your first head professional role. What sort of advice are you giving to a brand new head pro?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think there's a couple different things that come to mind. Be a sponge. Don't think you have to come in every day and, make an impact. You might get hired at a spot that's looking to make changes, and that's a different opportunity. But generally speaking, you're coming into a place, be a sponge, be patient. Golf courses move like cruise ships, so nothing happens quickly. And, new head professional, like, spend as much time, out in front as possible, like greeting members or guests if you're, at a private or a public course. Be visible. It is extremely easy to get, stuck in your office and doing administrative work. And we can all say we've got a ton of that to do. But, if it's, showing up a little early, getting some of that done, and then during peak hours, being out front of the golf shop or up at the first tee, I think that pays dividends. You're going to make your job easier, even though you might feel like you're missing out on work, because, if somebody's got a problem, they're going to say it to you, right there, and you can kind of snuff it out quick. You can answer a question that is going to, might come in an email later. You can talk to people, get to know them. They're going to want to get to know you. So it is one of those things that I almost think the more face time you spend, the less, you're going to get bogged down with those things, because, you'll figure out a way to do those efficiently. And you might say, hey, you know, I've got 3 emails from so and so last night. They're coming to the first tee at 9 o'clock. Why don't I, just send them an email being like, hey, we'll talk in an hour and I'll meet you at the first tee and discuss it that way. And I think people appreciate that a lot more nowadays, or appreciate that a lot, and it is lost nowadays. So new professionals, as much FaceTime as possible. I think that's gonna, provide longevity. Your members don't care, how many emails you have or how much work you have to do. They want to see you. They want to know you're there. They want to talk to you about what happened on the weekend, or why the course is playing a certain way, or whatever it is. And again, it is probably going to, resolve some of those issues sooner rather than later.
That's great. That is some great advice. And I think that showing up, showing initiative that way is going to be super valuable. And you have made such an impact over your first 2 years. I think there's a lot to be taken away from today from an assistant or that associate that's now making that new step. So Connor, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to give you one last chance here. If there's anything you want to share, no pressure here. Thank you again, Connor, for joining us today. And I learned a ton, and it's you've motivated me and inspired me. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a big thank you to yourself. I mean, you've helped me a ton in my career, and when I started a podcast, you were one of the first guys on. So, and I think you came on a couple times. So, happy to do the same for you. And I think things like this are fantastic. The golf industry is so niche in the how to get better and learning and education that's out there. And there's a couple podcasts out there now, but this stuff's fantastic. And I wish I had something like this when I was trying to figure out how to make my career. Not saying I'm full of all the answers and a chamber of wisdom, but I know you'll get some great people on here that'll help young professionals in the future.
I love it. And I think, yeah, you did an amazing job with that. And I got to admit, I think you were one of the first to break into that space. So appreciate you coming on again, Connor. And that is the wrap up of this episode today for breaking into the golf industry. For your chance to be a head professional for your first time, or whether you're an aspiring professional just getting into the industry. We hope you took a lot away from this. Thank you again, Connor. And until next time, continue breaking the golf industry.